powerful billionaire found himself trapped inside the elevator of his own company, never imagining that the only one capable of saving him would be the cook's son, a boy invisible to everyone's eyes, but possessing extraordinary talent. Secrets came to light, loyalties were tested, and nothing would ever be the same. A story of courage, revelation, and transformation that will touch your heart. So subscribe to the channel now, hit the like button on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Sometimes, the greatest talent hides in the places we don't even look. The first ray of sunlight had not yet touched the skyscrapers of Manhattan when Michael entered the imposing building of Horizon Enterprises through the back door. His eyes, a deep and curious brown, absorbed every detail of the environment as he followed his mother, Helen, through the service corridors. The worn backpack on his shoulders carried much more than dog-eared advanced mathematics and physics books. It also held dreams too big for a 13-year-old boy whom everyone knew only as the cook's son. Helen smiled at her son, while tying the white apron over her simple uniform. Her fingers, marked by years of hard work, lovingly adjusted the boy's unruly hair. "Remember, sweetheart, you can stay in the break room studying, but don't bother anyone. They have important work to do." Michael nodded, but his eyes were already wandering to the exposed electrical panel where a maintenance technician was working. The fascination in his gaze was almost palpable. In that building of glass and steel, two realities coexisted without ever truly touching. On the 40th floor, Robert Donovan, the billionaire owner of the corporation, began another day surrounded by luxury and deference. Below, in the building's depths, people like Helen prepared coffee, cleaned restrooms, and ensured everything functioned so that the important people never had to think about how life actually happened. What no one imagined was that on that autumn morning, these two realities would collide violently, making everyone question who was truly invisible and who was indispensable in that so meticulously constructed power structure. Michael never knew his father. Helen crossed the border pregnant, fleeing extreme poverty and violence in her country. New York wasn't the promised land she expected, but it offered enough to survive. At 13, Michael was already a silent prodigy. His teachers at the local public school didn't know how to handle a boy who solved advanced calculus problems, while his classmates still struggled with simple fractions. That morning, sitting in a corner of the industrial kitchen, Michael leafed through a book on electrical systems when he heard laughter in the corridor. Three executives in impeccable suits passed by, coffees in hand, absorbed in their own importance. "Did you see the cook's son with those books?" As if he'd ever get out of here. The comment was followed by dismissive laughter that faded as they walked away. Helen, who had also heard, approached her son. "Don't mind them, Michael. Words don't define who you are. One day they'll know my name, Mom," the boy replied, eyes fixed on the book's pages, fingers slightly gripping the worn edges. "And it won't be as the cook's son." What Michael didn't know was that this day would come much sooner than anyone could imagine. On the 40th floor, Robert Donovan gazed at Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office. At 57, he had built a technological empire that revolutionized the sustainable energy market. Though few knew the true secret of his success, an extraordinary ability to appropriate others' ideas and transform them into gold. "Mr. Donovan, your meeting with the Chinese investors is confirmed for 10 o'clock, informed his assistant Amanda, an efficient woman whose fear of her boss was only surpassed by her ambition to one day occupy an office near his. "Excellent. Has Lucas arrived yet? I need him to explain that failure in the Marshall Project before the Chinese arrive. Mr. Vance is on the 38th floor, finalizing some tests," she replied, without mentioning that Lucas had worked all night correcting problems that Donovan himself had created by altering specifications without consulting the technical team. Donovan checked his platinum watch. "Tell him I want a complete report in 30 minutes. I'm going down to check personally." Amanda nodded, knowing that checking personally meant Donovan would look for someone to blame if things weren't perfect. It was how he maintained control, through fear. Minutes later, the billionaire entered his private elevator, a luxury capsule with rare wood panels and gold details. His reflection in the mirror showed a man of impeccable posture, perfectly trimmed gray hair, and eyes as cold as the steel of the structures he had erected throughout the city. He pressed the button for the 38th floor. The elevator began to descend smoothly. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The cabin shook violently before stopping with a dry jolt. The silence that followed was absolute. Donovan blinked, momentarily disoriented. He pressed the emergency button, expecting the security guard's familiar voice. Nothing happened. He tried the internal communicator. Silence. He checked his cell phone. No signal. For the first time in decades, Robert Donovan was completely alone, without control, trapped in a metal box between floors of his own empire, and something very primitive awakened in his chest. Fear. The news that the CEO's elevator had stopped spread through the building like fire. On the executive floor, Lucas Vance, technology director, frantically coordinated maintenance teams. At 35, Lucas was considered an engineering genius, though he rarely received the credit he deserved. "Have you checked the main system? And the backup?" he asked, while technicians ran back and forth. "Everything's locked up, sir," an engineer replied. "It's as if someone had blocked the security protocols from inside." Amanda approached, visibly agitated. "Lucas, we need to solve this now. Mr. Donovan has been in there for almost an hour. He's already called 3 times through the emergency system and is threatening to fire the entire maintenance team." "We're doing everything possible," Lucas replied, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "It looks like a failure in the system's core. I've never seen anything like it." In the corridor, agitated executives discussed while external teams specialized in rescue arrived with heavy equipment. The situation became more chaotic by the minute. "How long until we can open that door?" Amanda shouted to a technician. "If it's brute force, maybe hours. We're talking about an elevator with state-of-the-art security protocols." Time passed. In the main office, investors and directors gathered in a crisis atmosphere. Inside the elevator, Donovan alternated between periods of fury and moments of growing anxiety, as the air seemed to become thinner. On the lower floors, the news also circulated. Helen heard about the incident while preparing lunch for the executives, which would now probably grow cold while the crisis unfolded. "They say not even the external teams can make the elevator work," commented one of the security guards passing through the kitchen. Michael, who was in the small adjacent break room, looked up from his book. Elevators had always fascinated him. Closed systems with their own logic, like small independent worlds. In recent months, he had devoured everything he could find about automation and building security systems. "What kind of failure are they having?" he asked, approaching timidly. The security guard looked at the boy with disinterest. "Go back to your books, kid. This is serious business." Michael hesitated, looking at his mother. Helen shook her head subtly, suggesting he not insist. But something in her son's look made her stop. She knew that expression, the same one he had when solving complex problems, as if he could see solutions invisible to others. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" she asked quietly. "If all systems are locked at the same time, including backups, it can't be a common failure," he replied, almost whispering. "There must be something interfering with the control core." Helen hesitated. Her instinct was to protect her son, keep him away from the spotlight. All her life she had built walls so Michael could grow safely, invisible to the dangers that people like them faced when they drew too much attention. But she also knew that, sooner or later, her son's extraordinary talent could no longer be contained. "Come on," she finally said, removing her apron. "But stay close to me." On the 38th floor, chaos was increasing. External technicians had arrived with heavy equipment, considering the possibility of cutting part of the structure to access the elevator. Executives shouted on the phone with lawyers, worried about legal implications. Lucas Vance, exhausted, stared at computer screens showing incomprehensible codes. It was at this moment that Helen and Michael arrived, almost unnoticed in the confusion. The boy observed everything with attentive eyes, quickly absorbing information. "Excuse me," Helen tried to speak with one of the security guards. "My son might be able to help." The man barely looked at her. "Ma'am, go back to the kitchen. We have specialists working here." But Michael had already approached one of the screens, where lines of code scrolled rapidly. His eyes followed the commands with growing fascination. "This isn't a common failure," he said, loud enough for some nearby technicians to hear. "Someone programmed this." Lucas Vance turned around, noticing the boy in school uniform next to a woman in kitchen staff clothes for the first time. "What did you say?" he asked, more out of surprise than real interest. "Look at these patterns," Michael pointed to the screen. "They're routines programmed deliberately to block security protocols. It's not a bug, it's an invasion." A momentary silence formed around them. Some executives laughed nervously. "Who is this kid?" one of them asked with disdain. "He's the cook's son," another replied, recognizing Helen. "What's he doing here?" Lucas Vance, however, looked attentively at the screen. After months working under constant pressure, there was something in the boy's comment that resonated with his own unspoken suspicions. "How do you know this?" he asked, ignoring the others. "I've studied automation systems," Michael replied simply. "And this code has specific signatures. Look here and here," he pointed to sequences on the screen. They're custom commands to specifically bypass this building's protocols. Amanda approached, irritated. This is ridiculous. A kitchen boy isn't going to solve what specialized teams can't. It doesn't hurt to listen, Lucas replied, increasingly intrigued. What do you think we should do, kid? Michael took a deep breath, feeling all eyes on him. I need access to the main terminal. If it's what I'm thinking, I can find the origin of the malicious code. Absolutely not, intervened James Peterson, Executive Vice President. We're not going to give access to critical systems to a worker's son, Michael completed, looking him in the eyes with surprising dignity. If you don't trust me, you can observe every command I type. But every minute we spend arguing, your boss continues trapped in there. The comment caused visible discomfort. Lucas exchanged glances with Amanda, who seemed torn between indignation and growing desperation. 15 minutes, Lucas finally decided. Under my direct supervision. Helen squeezed her son's shoulder, a mixture of pride and fear in her eyes. Are you sure, sweetheart? Miguel nodded. I am, Mom. Inside the elevator, Robert Donovan was sitting on the floor, tie loosened, impeccable suit now wrinkled. The air was becoming heavier, and a thin veil of sweat covered his forehead. The clock showed almost 2 hours of confinement, incompetence, he muttered to himself. All of them. But beneath the anger, a primordial fear grew. The man who had controlled so many lives, who had built fortunes manipulating people like chess pieces, now faced his own fragility. In his 60 years of life, Robert Donovan had rarely been alone, always surrounded by assistants, drivers, security guards. The silence of the stopped elevator forced him into unwanted introspection. Images emerged in his mind. His father, a factory worker, dying too young. His relentless rise in business, stepping on competitors. Faces of people he had destroyed along the way. And most disturbing, the emptiness he felt even in moments of greatest triumph. He looked at his watch again. How long would the air last? He felt his heart accelerate with this thought. Would it end like this? Alone in a metal box? In the improvised command center, Michael sat before the main terminal. Lucas had authorized red access, enough for the boy to investigate without being able to alter critical systems. What exactly are you looking for? Lucas asked, observing over the boy's shoulder. Digital traces, Michael replied, fingers moving with surprising agility across the keyboard. Whoever did this left signatures. In the room, the atmosphere was one of skepticism and tension. Executives observed from a distance, some visibly uncomfortable with the presence of servants in that space. Helen remained in a corner, eyes fixed on her son, praying silently. Michael navigated through layers of code with disconcerting naturalness. For him, it was like reading a familiar book. Each line told a story. Each command revealed intentions. Here, he finally said, pointing to the screen. I found the first entry point. Lucas leaned in, frowning. This looks internal, as if someone with high-level credentials had implanted the code. Exactly, Michael confirmed. And it wasn't today. This routine was installed weeks ago, programmed to activate specifically today, when the elevator was used by Mr. Donovan. A murmur went through the room. Amanda approached, now visibly interested. Can you see who did this? She asked. Michael hesitated. I can trace the login used, but I need more access. Lucas and Amanda exchanged glances. The situation had evolved from technical emergency to possible internal sabotage. Give him what he needs, Amanda ordered, surprising everyone. With the new level of access, Michael dove even deeper into the systems. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the boy's soft typing. On the screen, command windows opened and closed rapidly. Found it, he finally announced. The code was implanted using Mr. Peterson's credentials. All eyes turned to James Peterson, who had just entered the room. The vice president visibly paled. This is absurd. I would never do such a thing. The records show otherwise, Michael continued, imperturbable. And there's more. I found emails sent from your terminal to Tech Vision Corp. He paused, looking at Lucas. Isn't that your main competitor? Peterson's face contorted with fury. You don't know what you're talking about, kid. This is clearly a setup. Lucas approached the screen, checking the records himself. The authentication logs are authentic, James. They were your credentials. Anyone could have stolen my password. Peterson shouted, looking nervously toward the door. It's not just that, Michael continued. The code has specific patterns. I compared it with other internal projects. He opened a new window on the screen. This same style appears in all projects that Mr. Peterson supervised in the last 6 months. The room plunged into shocked silence. Peterson, seeing himself cornered, made a sudden movement toward the door, but 2 security guards already blocked him. This is absurd. A kid's word against mine? I built this company with Donovan. Michael ignored the outburst, concentrated on the screen. I can reverse the blockade now, but I'll need full system access. Lucas didn't hesitate this time. Do whatever is necessary. While Peterson was restrained by security guards, Michael initiated the recovery sequence. His hands moved with surgical precision over the keyboard, undoing layers of malicious code one by one. Helen watched with a tight heart. Her son, who had always been invisible in that building, was now the center of all attention. Pride and fear mixed in her chest. Done, Michael finally announced. System restored. As if to confirm his words, the monitoring panel blinked, showing the elevator coming back to life. Seconds later, communication was re-established. Mr. Donovan? Amanda's voice sounded through the intercom. Can you hear us? After a moment of silence, the billionaire's hoarse voice replied, What the hell happened? We're bringing you to the ground floor now, she replied, exchanging relieved glances with Lucas. We have a lot to explain. The elevator doors opened in the main lobby. Robert Donovan emerged like a man who had just faced his own demons. Disheveled hair, pale face, red eyes. Nothing of his usual imposing posture remained. He was received by a committee of nervous executives, security guards, and emergency teams. Peterson had already been taken to a separate room under constant surveillance. Sir, Amanda began, there was a sabotage attempt. James Peterson implanted malicious code in the system. Donovan stared at her, slowly processing the information. Peterson, why? We found evidence of communication with Tech Vision, Lucas explained. Apparently he had been selling information for months. And who discovered this? Donovan asked, still disoriented. An uncomfortable silence hung. Amanda and Lucas exchanged glances. It was our cook's son, sir, Amanda finally replied. A 13-year-old boy. Donovan blinked, incredulous. Are you telling me I was trapped for hours because none of our specialists could solve what a 13-year-old boy did in minutes? No one answered. The truth was too embarrassing. Where is this boy? Lucas gestured and Michael approached timidly, Helen right behind him. The contrast couldn't be greater. The disheveled billionaire and the boy in simple clothes, both in the center of the luxurious lobby under the gaze of dozens of people. What's your name, boy? Donovan asked, studying him intensely. Michael Rodriguez, sir, he replied, maintaining steady eye contact despite his nervousness. And how did you know what to do? Michael hesitated. I study a lot about systems and programming. When I heard about the problem, I realized it could be sabotage. Donovan looked at Helen, who remained protectively behind her son. You're his mother? Yes, sir, she replied, her voice firm despite her fear. I've worked in the kitchen for 8 years. The billionaire remained silent for a few moments, as if trying to understand a particularly difficult equation. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand to Michael. It seems I owe you my life, young Michael. The boy looked at the extended hand, and then at the man's face. There was something different in the billionaire's eyes, a vulnerability no one had ever seen before. Michael shook the offered hand. Anyone would have done the same, sir, Donovan smiled slightly. No, boy, they wouldn't have. He looked around at the embarrassed faces of his technology team. That became very clear today. In the days that followed, Horizon Enterprises was shaken by seismic changes. James Peterson was arrested for industrial espionage and sabotage. Investigations revealed he had planned not only to sell information to competitors, but also to take control of the company after a possible accident with Donovan. For Helen, the transformation was immediate. From invisible cook, she became supervisor of the entire food service team, with tripled salary and benefits she had never dreamed of. But the biggest change was for Michael. On the Monday following the incident, instead of staying in the staff break room, he was led to the newly created Horizon Young Talents program, with a full scholarship for studies and an apprentice position in the technology department. I can't believe it, he whispered to his mother as they got to know his new space, a workstation in the development department. Helen squeezed his hand. Believe it, sweetheart. You deserved every bit of this. Lucas Vance, now promoted to Vice President of Technology, would be his direct mentor. We have a lot to learn from you, Michael, he said, without any trace of the condescension other adults usually showed. At the end of that first week, Michael was called to Donovan's office. He nervously entered the space that had once seemed as distant as the moon. The billionaire was seated behind his desk, but something in him had changed. Arrogance had given way to a kind of reflective quietude. Sit down, Michael, he invited, indicating the chair in front of him. How are you adapting? Very well, sir. Everyone has been kind. Donovan smiled slightly. I imagine it's a big change. Yes, sir. But I've always dreamed of working with technology. The billionaire observed him in silence for a few moments. You know, I spent my entire life judging people by what they could do for me. Titles, degrees, connections. These were the things that mattered. He paused. But in that elevator, none of that saved me. Michael remained silent, sensing the man needed to unburden himself. I'm creating a new program, Donovan continued. Scholarships and opportunities for children of employees from all areas. And I want it to bear your name. My name? Michael asked, surprised. The Michael Rodriguez Program for Exceptional Talents. Donovan leaned forward slightly. What do you think? The boy pondered for a moment. It's a great honor, sir. But if I may suggest, perhaps it could have my mother's name? Donovan raised his eyebrows, surprised. Your mother? Yes. Helen Rodriguez has worked here for 8 years, invisible to almost everyone. She taught me that value has nothing to do with titles or where you were born. If it weren't for her bringing me here every day, for believing in me when no one else did, I never would have had the chance to help. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, studying the boy with a new look of respect. The Helen Rodriguez Program, he repeated slowly, to remind everyone that the next genius might be serving our coffee. He smiled genuinely. I like it. Your mother must be an extraordinary woman. She is, sir, Michael replied, with undisguised pride in his voice. She really is. 3 months after the elevator incident, Horizon Enterprises held a formal ceremony to launch the Helen Rodriguez Program. The large auditorium was packed, executives in expensive suits side by side with maintenance, security, and cleaning staff. For the first time, the invisible barriers that separated floors seemed momentarily dissolved. Helen, wearing a simple but elegant dress, sat in the front row, still uncomfortable with all the attention. Beside her, Michael displayed a serene smile, as if he had always known this day would come. Robert Donovan took the stage. His speech was brief and direct, without the usual pomp of corporate events. 3 months ago, I learned the most valuable lesson of my 60 years, he began. When I was trapped in that elevator, it wasn't my Harvard degrees, nor my billions that saved me. It was a 13-year-old boy whom many of us barely noticed in the corridors. He paused, looking directly at Michael and Helen. That day, I was saved by someone I would have ignored if we had passed in the hallway. This made me realize how many talents we're wasting because of our prejudices and assumptions. Donovan then formally announced the program: full scholarships for study, internship opportunities, and mentorship for children of employees from all areas. Initial investment, $50 million. And why the name Helen Rodriguez? He continued. Because we need to remember that behind every extraordinary talent, there's someone who believed first, someone who cultivated that seed against all odds. Helen discreetly wiped away a tear. Michael held her hand firmly. After the ceremony, while executives and staff mingled at the reception, Lucas Vance approached Michael. How's the project? He asked, referring to the enhanced security system the boy was helping develop. Almost finished, Michael replied enthusiastically. I think we've managed to create something truly invasion-proof, Lucas smiled. You know, when I first saw you that day, I thought, who is this kid? Now everyone knows who Michael Rodriguez is. I'm not that special, Michael replied, with the humility his mother had taught him. I just had the right opportunity, and that's exactly what we want to give others like you, came Donovan's voice, who had approached unnoticed. Opportunities. The billionaire seemed different now, less the intimidating figure of before and more a man in the process of redemption. The hours in the elevator had provoked a life evaluation that continued to unfold. Mr. Donovan, Michael greeted. My mother and I are very grateful for everything. No, Michael. I'm the one who owes gratitude. Donovan looked at Helen, who was talking with other nearby staff. Your mother raised an extraordinary son, while facing challenges that someone like me can barely imagine. That's true strength. At that moment, observing his mother finally being seen and respected, Michael felt a deep certainty. Real value had nothing to do with which floor you worked on, what car you drove, or what last name you carried. It had to do with who you chose to be when facing obstacles, with the dignity you maintained even when others tried to diminish you. 1 year later, life at Horizon Enterprises had changed profoundly. The Helen Rodriguez program already benefited more than 50 talented young people, children of employees who previously had barely any hope of higher education. The old rigid separation between upper floor and lower floors began to dissolve, replaced by a culture of mutual respect that, though still imperfect, represented a silent revolution. Helen now coordinated not only food service but all employee welfare, creating gathering spaces that humanized the corporate environment. Her simple wisdom, once restricted to the kitchen, now influenced decisions in the board of directors. On an autumn afternoon, similar to the one that had changed everything, Michael sat in the 40th floor cafeteria, a space once reserved only for executives, now open to all. At 14, he had grown a few inches, but maintained the same observant gaze and quiet determination. Robert Donovan approached, carrying his own coffee cup, a newly acquired habit that had surprised everyone. The billionaire now made it a point to personally know each employee, especially those who had previously been invisible to him. "How's the new project?" he asked, sitting across from Michael. The boy smiled, closing the laptop where he was working. "Good. I think we found a way to make energy systems 30% more efficient." Donovan nodded, impressed. Michael's contribution had already resulted in 2 patents, something unprecedented for someone so young. "You know Stanford has already expressed interest in you?" the billionaire commented. "At 14. Impressive." Michael shifted, uncomfortable with praise as always. "I still have a lot to learn." "We all do," Donovan replied, looking out the window at Manhattan's horizon. "You know, in the first days after the elevator incident, I was embarrassed. Not just for being saved by a boy, but for realizing how much talent I had ignored over the years." Michael remained silent, sensing this was one of those rare occasions when the powerful businessman let his guard down. "You asked me once why I started this company," Donovan continued. "The truth is, I wanted to prove something to the world. My father was a factory worker, died too young from exhaustion. I promised myself I would be different, that I would have power. But in the process, I became exactly the type of person I despised." "You're changing that now," Michael observed. Donovan smiled melancholically. "I'm trying. You know what I learned in that elevator? That real power isn't about controlling others. It's about the impact you leave." At that moment, Lucas entered the cafeteria, accompanied by 2 young engineers who had joined through the Helen Rodriguez program. "Mr. Donovan, Michael," he greeted. "We have news about the sustainable energy project for rural communities." Donovan gestured for them to join. "Michael was just telling me about advances in energy efficiency." The conversation flowed naturally, with ideas being exchanged without hierarchy. The billionaire, the prodigy boy, and the young engineers collaborating as equals. It was a scene unthinkable a year before. While they discussed, Helen entered the cafeteria, bringing a tray with fresh coffee and homemade cookies, a tradition she had instituted and that had become surprisingly popular among executives. "Mom," Michael smiled upon seeing her. Helen placed the tray on the table. "I brought a snack for the geniuses." Donovan stood politely. "Helen, join us." We were discussing the project for rural communities. Helen hesitated briefly. There were still moments when the transformation of her reality seemed unreal, but then sat beside her son. "Actually," Donovan continued, "I'd like to hear your opinion. You grew up in a rural community, didn't you? Your perspective would be valuable." The fact that Robert Donovan, one of New York's most powerful men, was sincerely asking for the opinion of a former cook demonstrated how much the company's culture had changed. Helen shared her experiences about the real needs of communities like the one she had left behind. Her practical knowledge perfectly complemented the engineer's technical theories. For the first time, she spoke without timidity about her ideas for bringing technology to forgotten places. "That's brilliant," Lucas commented, after hearing a particularly insightful suggestion. "We never would have thought of that without your experience, Helen." Michael watched his mother with overflowing pride. She had always been extraordinary. The world had just taken time to notice. The next night, Helen and Michael sat at the table in their new home, a comfortable apartment near work, very different from the cramped space they had shared before. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Helen asked, serving the soup she had prepared. "Incredible. Mr. Donovan approved my idea for the reverse mentorship program." "Reverse mentorship?" Michael smiled, animated. "Yes. Senior executives will be mentored by junior and entry-level employees. The idea is that those on the upper floors need to learn from those who see the company from other angles." Helen shook her head, amazed. "When I think about how it was a year ago, it doesn't even seem like the same company. Doesn't even seem like the same life." Michael agreed, thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the elevator hadn't stopped that day." Helen reached across the table, holding her son's hand. "I believe your talent would have found a way sooner or later. People like you don't remain invisible forever, sweetheart. But there are so many other talents that never get a chance," Michael replied. "That's why I'm so excited about the scholarship program. Can you imagine how many cooks' sons are out there, waiting for just one opportunity?" Helen smiled. The expression cook's son, once used with disdain, now carried new meaning at Horizon. It was a symbol of unrecognized potential, of talent that blooms in unlikely terrain. "You know what makes me most proud of you?" she said, looking into his eyes. "It's not your intelligence nor your success. It's how you remain true to who you are, how you don't forget where we came from." Michael nodded, understanding deeply. In a world where success often distanced people from their origins, He made it a point to remain anchored in the simple wisdom his mother had taught him. How could I forget? Everything I am began with you, Mom. A few days later, Horizon Enterprises received an important visit. Representatives of an international foundation interested in the Helen Rodriguez program, considering replicating it globally. The meeting took place in the same auditorium where the program had been launched a year before. This time, however, Michael and Helen sat at the main table, alongside Donovan and other executives. What makes this program unique, Donovan explained to the visitors, isn't just the financial investment but the cultural change. We're questioning who deserves to be at the table where decisions are made. One of the representatives, a man with a skeptical expression, intervened. Impressive numbers, Mr. Donovan. But let's be realistic. To what extent can a large corporation really eliminate hierarchies? Aren't these just nice words for public relations? Before Donovan could respond, Michael spoke. May I answer that? Upon receiving an affirmative nod, he continued. A year ago, I was literally the cook's son. Today, I lead an innovation team. But the most important thing isn't my personal trajectory, but the fact that now there are dozens of young people like me having similar opportunities, Helen completed, with a confidence that would have been unthinkable before. Real change isn't just about who rises, but about how everyone is treated regardless of where they are. Our maintenance staff now participate in decisions about space design. Receptionists contribute to customer service policies. Knowledge circulates in all directions. The representative seemed surprised to be answered not by the CEO, but by a teenager and a former cook who spoke with such authority. Lucas, who was attending the meeting, added, Our productivity has increased 40% since these changes. Turnover has decreased dramatically. It's not philanthropy, it's business intelligence. After the meeting, while visitors were led on a tour of the building, Donovan approached Michael. Do you realize what happened there? He asked. Michael frowned, confused. What do you mean? You answered that man with complete naturalness, as if you had always belonged at that table. And you should have. Donovan paused reflectively. When I was your age, my father took me once to the factory owner's office. I was paralyzed, could barely speak. I spent decades trying to prove I deserved to be in that room. The difference is that you made me feel I belong here, Michael replied simply. Donovan nodded. And that's perhaps the biggest lesson I learned from you, Michael. Real power isn't making others feel small. It's giving space for them to feel big. If this story is already moving you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. Here you'll always find inspiring and surprising stories that show how destiny can change in an instant. Winter came to New York, covering the city with a white blanket that softened the edges of skyscrapers. On Christmas night, Horizon Enterprises held its annual party. But, unlike previous years, it wasn't an exclusive event for executives. The building's immense lobby had been transformed into a welcoming space where employees from all levels and their families celebrated together. Michael circulated among the guests, greeting people who had once barely noticed him and now treated him with genuine respect, not because of the position he held, but because of the character he demonstrated. Near the large Christmas tree, Helen chatted animatedly with a diverse group, a mixture of senior executives and maintenance staff, united by a new culture of collaboration that she had helped build. There you are, said Donovan, approaching Michael with a small package in his hands. I have something for you. Michael accepted the gift, surprised. You didn't need to, Mr. Donovan. Open it, he insisted. Inside the box was a metal piece. Michael recognized it immediately. It was part of the elevator panel that had stopped that fateful day. I had it preserved when we replaced the system, Donovan explained, to never forget how a failure can become the beginning of something extraordinary. Michael held the piece, feeling its symbolic weight. Thank you. It means a lot. You know, Donovan continued, observing the party around them. I spent my life building walls, between departments, between people, between us and them. It took being trapped in a metal box to realize how artificial those divisions were. At that moment, Lucas approached with a champagne glass, accompanied by his wife. Michael, we were looking for you. I have news about your application for MIT's summer program. Has the result come out? Michael asked, anxious. Lucas smiled. Not only did they accept you, but they asked to be the first partners of the Helen Rodriguez program outside of Horizon. Michael could barely contain his emotion. At 14, he would be the youngest participant in the prestigious summer program's history. Helen joined the group, noticing her son's excitement. Upon learning the news, she hugged him tightly. I'm so proud, sweetheart. So proud. Michael returned the hug, aware that each of his achievements was also hers. of the woman who had cleaned tables and served coffee so he could study, who had believed in his potential when no one else did. On the other side of the hall, 3 executives observed the scene. "Who would have thought," commented one of them, "that the cook's son would become the face of innovation at Horizon?" "And who would have thought," replied another, "that a 13-year-old boy would teach us more about leadership than Harvard?" Spring. New York bloomed in colors after the long winter. In Horizon Enterprises' large auditorium, hundreds of people gathered for a historic event, the launch of the Global Helen Rodriguez Fund, a billion-dollar initiative to identify and support talents in marginalized communities around the world. On stage, Michael, now close to turning 15, adjusted the microphone, still uncomfortable under the spotlight, but increasingly confident in his voice. "A little over a year ago, I was just an invisible boy in the corridors of this building," he began. "Today, I stand before you not just as part of Horizon's team, but as a symbol of what happens when we remove artificial barriers between people." In the front row, Helen watched her son with teary eyes. Beside her, Robert Donovan, now a visibly more serene man who had found new purpose in his life, listened attentively. "The global fund we launched today isn't about charity," Michael continued. "It's about justice. About recognizing that genius, creativity, and innovation aren't privileges of the few, but potentials distributed equally, though opportunities are not." He looked at the diverse audience, corporate executives, community leaders, young students, all united by a shared vision of a world where talent and potential transcended socioeconomic barriers. "But the real story didn't begin with that elevator," he continued. "It began much earlier when my mother, Helen Rodriguez, crossed borders pregnant, carrying not just a child in her womb, but an unshakable dream of dignity and possibility." In the front row, Helen, now a globally respected figure, advisor to presidents and CEOs, smiled at her son. Beside her, Robert Donovan, with completely white hair but still lively eyes, listened attentively. "The most important lesson of these 20 years isn't about technology, education, or philanthropy," Michael continued. "It's about how we see each other. About recognizing that the next Einstein might be cleaning your floor, that the next great leader might be serving your coffee, that solutions to our most urgent problems might come from the minds of those we traditionally exclude from decision-making tables." While Michael spoke, projected images showed the program's global impact: schools in slums producing brilliant scientists, rural communities generating sustainable innovations, children of domestic workers becoming doctors, engineers, artists, leaders. "Our goal for the next 5 years is to reach 1 million young talents in vulnerable situations, not just offering education, but creating ecosystems where they can prosper and transform their communities." The audience applauded enthusiastically. Among them, many of the executives who had once barely noticed Helen in the corridors now treated her with reverence, not just for the name the program carried, but for the active role she had assumed in its conception and implementation. At the end of Michael's presentation, Helen took the stage for a moment few expected. The announcement that the Foundation's leadership would officially pass to the next generation, not just to Michael, but to a diverse council of young leaders, emerged from the program itself. "20 years ago," she said, "I was just the cook trying to raise my son the best way possible. Today I see a global movement that transcends any individual. It's time for new voices, new visions, new energy." The symbolic gesture of passing the torch was received with emotion by those present. For Helen, it represented the deepest realization of her vision, not just creating opportunities, but seeing those who receive them become multipliers, continuing the virtuous cycle of transformation. Later, in a quiet room away from the celebrations, Helen, Michael, and Robert Donovan shared a moment of intimate reflection. 20 years, Donovan murmured, shaking his head in admiration. "Who could have imagined where we'd arrive when that elevator stopped?" Helen smiled. "The journey is just beginning. Each new young person we reach represents infinite possibilities." Michael observed the two with deep affection. His mother, his rock, his constant inspiration. And the man who had once been an arrogant billionaire and was now a dedicated and humble ally in the mission to democratize opportunities. "You know what makes me happiest?" Michael asked. "That today in companies around the world, no one says, 'just the cook's son' anymore. Because everyone knows that person could be the next to save the company, the next to transform an industry, the next to change the world." Helen nodded, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "And that, sweetheart, is worth more than all the prizes and recognition. It's the real change we were seeking." Donovan raised his glass in a simple toast. "To the cook's sons around the world, May they never be invisible again. On a quiet morning, a few days after the 20th anniversary celebrations, Michael walked through the old Horizon Enterprises building in Manhattan, now a social innovation center where young talents from diverse backgrounds developed solutions for humanity's most urgent challenges. In the main lobby, the artistic installation of the transparent elevator with the tree growing inside had become an iconic attraction. Now a mature tree, its branches extended beyond the structure's top, symbolizing how human potential, when properly nurtured, transcends artificial limitations. Michael stopped to observe a group of teenagers on a guided tour, young participants of the Helen Rodriguez program, many coming from marginalized communities around the world. Their faces shone with the same curiosity and determination he himself had felt years before. A girl of approximately 13, the same age he had been when it all began, separated from the group, approaching the artistic elevator. Her intelligent eyes studied the installation with analytical intensity. "It's incredible how it works, isn't it?" Michael commented, joining her. "The tree grows through a special hydroponic system inside the structure." The girl turned, surprised to be approached. "Actually, I was thinking the system could be more efficient. If they adjusted the nutrient distribution, they could reduce water consumption by at least 30%. Michael smiled, immediately recognizing the spark of genius that many adults would have ignored. "What's your name?" "Amara," she replied. "I'm from Lagos." "And how do you know so much about hydroponic systems, Amara?" "My mother works cleaning an agricultural research institute," the girl explained. "After school, I stay there waiting for her. The scientists let me read their articles and observe the experiments." Michael felt a powerful déjà vu, as if the universe were closing a perfect circle. "Do you know who I am, Amara?" She nodded. "Of course, Dr. Rodriguez. The founder of the program that brought me here. The cook's son who fixed the elevator?" "Exactly," he smiled. "And I'd very much like to hear your ideas about improving this hydroponic system." "Actually, we're just looking for someone to lead a water resource optimization project for communities with water scarcity." The girl's eyes lit up. "Really? I've so many ideas. In my community, we've developed methods to reuse every drop of water." "Come," Michael invited, indicating the way to the laboratories. "I want to introduce you to our team." As they walked, Michael felt a deep sensation of continuity and purpose. 20 years before, he was that girl, full of potential, just waiting to be seen. Now, the cycle continued, with new talents emerging from unexpected places, ready to solve the challenges of their time. The true legacy of the cook's son wasn't in the buildings or programs that bore his name, nor even in the revolutionary technologies he had created. It was in the fundamental change of perspective about human value, in the systematic demolition of artificial barriers that separate talents from opportunities. And as he guided Amara through the corridors where he had once walked invisible, Michael reflected on the deepest truth his extraordinary journey had revealed. Greatness has nothing to do with where you're born, but with who you decide to be, and with the hands that extend to lift others after you yourself rise. This story reminds us that we should never judge someone by their origin. The next genius, the next hero, might be serving coffee, cleaning the floor, or carrying boxes. In a world of artificial divisions, true transformation begins when we see the extraordinary potential hidden in the most common places. When we recognize that the cook's son can save not just a company, but transform the very fabric of our society. If this story touched you, hit the like button and share it with someone who also needs to hear this message. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far our stories reach.